Hello, everybody. It's me, Fee, or Fiona Timms, otherwise known as White Zulu, author of my autobiography of the same name. And I welcome you all to another chapter from my book. I do hope you're all enjoying my life story. And I must thank all of you for being such dedicated subscribers, especially those who write such complimentary messages below my videos. They are much appreciated. I would like to point out that the previous South African flag hanging on the wall behind me is not a political statement. It is simply a piece of history in the background of my first 50 years of life, being born and growing up in my beloved mother country, South Africa. My autobiography, White Zulu, is not a political commentary and frankly describes my experiences of growing up with the Zulu tribe as my family. That flag is simply a piece of cloth signifying the history of South Africa. It was originally used by the Union of South Africa from 1928 to 1961, when I was 11 years old, and later the Republic of South Africa until 1994. And welcome to another reading from my book, The White Zulu. And I left you guys where I'd been hauled back or tricked back into leaving England, now incarcerated in this horrendous boarding house and supposed to be going to commercial training college or Durban business school. I forget which one it is. I hardly ever went there. And what I used to do with my friends is go down to the beach to watch the surfers and flirt with anyone and everything that was there, especially the lifesavers, the lifeguards, those heroic looking figures in their tight Speedos, muscles rippling and oiled. So I'll pick up where I left off. This piece is called Durban 1969, Part 2. The guys gathered at North Beach, arriving with their long boards strapped to the roofs of their battered old cars. Remember the long boards? They got shorter and shorter and shorter. And eventually the boys were surfing on things the size of skateboards. But back right at the beginning, as I remember it, the longboards were the thing. Some sat on the golden sand, waxing their boards, now and again staring out to sea with narrowed eyes. "Surf's up," one would say, looking at the sapphire breakers curling in to crash in great foamy cascades in the shallows, arriving eventually as crystal clear wavelets laced with froth, which hissed over the wet sand almost to our feet. "Nah, it's crap," grunted another. None of them ever seemed to agree on the quality of the waves. They all paddled out there to sit on their boards, rising and falling in the glassy swell. Every now and again, they all paddled furiously, looking back over their shoulders at a good-sized wave as it reared higher than the others. Then they stood up one by one, knees bent, and rode the curl until it broke over the backs of their boards. Now and again somebody fell off, sometimes quite spectacularly, his board somersaulting and spinning in the air. "Wipe out," the watchers called, and "Cool." That was a hairy one, and cackled with laughter. We lay on our towels or sat wriggling our toes into the warm sand, and watched the guys, mostly university students, who were also bunking lectures, whilst our bodies tanned to golden brown. We walked into the sea to cool off, enjoying the silky warm water which prickled refreshingly on our baked skin as it swirled around our bodies. Some of the surfers asked us out that night, and then that became my routine. Now and again I went to college, just to show my face, but the staff there didn't seem to either notice or mind that I was hardly ever there. Of course, I regretted it later, of course, because being able to type properly would have been so useful to me now, as would shorthand. I was nearly once caught out by my mother, who, instead of her usual weekly phone call at 6 in the morning, rang me at college, only to find I wasn't there. She rang Nora House straight away and was told I was still in bed. As luck would have it, I was genuinely off sick with conjunctivitis, caught off my current boyfriend. I wore contact lenses by that stage, and if the club became so smoky that my eyes began to sting, I cleaned them by taking them out, licking them and replacing them, a rather disgusting practice I'd learned from friends who also wore contacts. This was in between kissing the guy whose name escapes me now. There was always a small epidemic of pink eye going around, as the Africans, who seemed to suffer most, brought it in from the townships and infected people in the city, and, unbeknown to me, he'd contracted it the week before. I woke that morning with red eyes gummed together, sticky and painful, and had decided to lie low. "Your mother's coming down," came the message. My mother was furious that I wasn't at college, and she was so convinced I was bunking that she'd actually rung up an eye specialist, a friend of theirs, made an appointment for that afternoon, and was on her way from the farm 2 hours away to pick me up. I was to be ready and waiting for her in the foyer. When she arrived, she was so cross that she couldn't speak to me and just flung the car around in a squeal of ties. That's when we still had the old black Pontiac, to drive me to the specialist's rooms. He gave me a cursory examination. Conjunctivitis. How did you think you caught it? I started to tell him about kissing my boyfriend and the contact lenses when my mother interrupted me. She couldn't bear it any longer. Apart from being mistaken about my motives for missing college, she certainly didn't want to hear the sordid details of how I became infected, such common behaviour. "Are you sure?" she demanded of the doctor. "A classic case, there's no mistake," he said emphatically, and prescribed a tube of ointment. My mother was even more angry as she drove me back to Nora House in silence and jammed on the brakes when we got there. Without a word, she drove off, leaving a strip of smoking rubber on the tarmac. I knew she would be seething with rage and grinding her teeth all the way back to the farm. After that, she only rang me early in the morning. This was a particularly annoying habit of hers. On the rare occasions I was going to college, I liked to sleep in until the last minute, allowing myself just enough time to wash, fling on my clothes and walk fast, now and again breaking into a trot, to my first class at 8 in the morning. If I planned to spend the day on the beach, I slept in until 11, as I was freakily hung over on those mornings. We went out clubbing every night in a gang and drank on empty stomachs. I wasn't used to alcohol. My sisters and I had only been allowed a thimbleful of sherry or a glass of wine with dinner at home, and the odd chilled lager shandy before lunch on hot days. I didn't really know what to drink to ask for when I was being taken out, so I asked for gin and tonic. After my first evening out, and having knocked back several of them, to my alarm, I felt most peculiar and woozy. When I got back to my room and lay on my bed, the whole room spun around dizzily. I had the unpleasant experience of being sick in that wash basin that night, and I woke the next morning with a splitting headache, a dehydrated mouth, and a very queasy stomach. My first hangover. To have to be summoned to the telephone on the ground floor at 6 in the morning, when I'd only just gone to sleep, was the last straw. And with croaked monosyllables, I sullenly and blearily answered my mother's interrogations about my plans for that day. All I wanted to do was drink a huge mug of strong, milky coffee, take some aspirin, and flop back into bed until midday. If I'd recovered sufficiently by then, I could change into my bikini and, pulling a sundress over it, stroll down to North Beach and see what the buzz was down there, and where everybody was meeting up for tonight's session. Even if we'd been out, and when I'd become accustomed to drinking, no matter what condition we were in, we still met in one of the girls' rooms to gossip, drink coffee, and exchange even the most intimate details of our dates. We didn't discuss actual sex, though, as none of us ever went all the way, mainly because we were so terrified of the consequences. Birth control pills had only just been introduced into the country and were under strict control. As I recall, girls had to approach their family GP, who were able to issue a prescription, and only then with the consent of her parents. This certainly ruled me out. My mother's one and only contribution to my sex education had been a brisk, "Sex is for marriage and marriage alone," and I doubt my sisters were given any more information than that. None of us had the opportunity to go any further than French kissing and a fumble in the car from a guy before we were dropped back at Nora House, usually skidding in as the clock struck 11, while the Zulu night watchman, who stood on guard duty at the front door to see that nobody slipped out or came in after our curfew was up, looked pointedly at the big clock on the wall of the reception area. If anyone was late, he took out the late book and wrote our names down. We had to sign the book there and then as admission of guilt, and he handed it to the lady warden the following morning, even though we begged and pleaded to him to turn a blind eye. "Just this once, please." And even though I'd tried to coax some mercy out of him in Zulu, he remained impassive and wouldn't waive the rules. If, during the late 60s and early 70s, an unmarried girl was unlucky enough to have an unwanted pregnancy, she was not allowed an abortion. In South Africa, that country was so strictly ruled by Calvinistic government ministers. Terminations were only ever permitted if it was as a result of rape, incest, the baby was deformed in some way and wouldn't survive, or the mother's life would be in danger if she went through with her pregnancy and gave birth. For all these conditions, proof had to be submitted in one humiliating and degrading way or another before an abortion would be considered. Then, and only then, was the mother to be allowed into a state hospital to have the abortion. A committee of senior medical men had to approve this procedure, and each one satisfy himself that all the criteria had been met. Often all the red tape took so long that the unfortunate girl's pregnancy had gone beyond 3 months. The deadline for a legal state-approved termination, and had to go through with the unwanted or dangerous pregnancy anyway. As a result of this attitude, back street abortions were rife. If a girl had enough money, she could fly to England and have a legal private abortion over there. And I think, if I recall correctly, you could fly to Mozambique, Maputo, Lorenzo Marx, and have a safe abortion there in a hospital. But luckily that never happened to our family. Once upstairs, we stayed up until 2 every single morning, chatting, laughing, and trying on one another's clothes. I was always keen to borrow outfits. I'd been sent to the residence with my usual sensible variations on fawn floral shirt wasters, accessorized with matching belts, all ordered and approved by my mother. But in South Africa in 1969, Mary Quant style had recently become the fashion. The little girl look empire line, black and white op-art pattern dresses with short puffed or capped sleeves, a wide square neckline and the hem just below our panties, the way Twiggy wore them, suited my long coltish legs perfectly. Long tie-dyed hippie dresses were all the rage as well, using plenty of floating cheesecloth in psychedelic purples, oranges, pinks, and turquoise. We wove green, red, and yellow raffia daisies using a special kit that somebody had, and tied them between our bare toes instead of wearing sandals. With our brightly coloured mini skirts and skimpy tops, we wore sling-back sandals without stockings or tights. The Durban humidity made it too uncomfortable to cover our legs, and although it was one of the secretarial college's rules that all girls must wear tights, our legs were so smoothly tanned that we got away with it. In spite of a far from healthy diet and the minimum sleep, I never felt tired. I was 19, had plenty of stamina, a strong constitution, and, along with my fellow residents, I kept up this decadent lifestyle for the best part of 6 months. We usually went out in a gang of about 10 and then paired off during the evening into couples. We had 2 or 3 favourite hangouts. There was the Cascades, a disco in a hotel just behind the Durban beachfront, where they had a live band. Another, I can't remember its name, halfway up Berea Road, that had a DJ who played good music at full volume all night. The guys liked the place because from time to time, during the evening, go-go girls wearing tiny sequined bikini tops, little silver hot pants, and thigh-high silver boots would slip into gilded cages suspended from the ceiling on poles and gyrate very provocatively to the music. Then there was Smugglers Inn, or Smuggies, a real dive, so far down Point Road that it was practically in the docks. Point Road was inhabited by pimps who ran brothels in the buildings on both sides of the street and had a shocking reputation. Drug dealing went on there long before it became a problem throughout the beachfront. The drinks there cost a little more, but once the more conventional clubs had started to wind down, somebody would say, "Let's go down to Smuggies." We'd all look at each other. Should we? We'll be in a hell of a lot of trouble if our folks find out. The lure of the forbidden made the decision for us, and we clambered into various jalopies, skadonks, and, driven by the fairly drunk owners, roared down to Point Road to Smuggies to sit at tables around the darkened dance floor. The place was always crowded and only just starting to warm up when we arrived there long after midnight. There were always sailors there, as the nightclub was within easy, staggering distance of the docks, and we saw some truly bizarre sights, as seamen from all over the world mingled with local prostitutes and drug lords. As a result of my extremely sheltered background, I was wide-eyed, especially when I saw men slow dancing cheek to cheek with one another, marching on the dance floor. Our group drifted into the club around midnight, more as spectators than participants, and since the drinks were so overpriced, we could only afford one each, which we had to nurse for an hour. We found seats near the dance floor, and now and again, along with other patrons, boogied to numbers played by the club DJ. And that was also when the twist became the fashion. If any of you are old enough to remember the twist. The clientele was a mixed crowd of mostly men, with a few women here and there, clearly prostitutes. Apart from learning how to cross a street, I was getting a ringside view of the seamier side of life as well. But we felt quite safe. The surfers were tall, rangy, fit young men and, along with their naturally sun-bleached longish hair and tans, they had this laid-back look about them, and their appearance seemed to give off a non-menacing atmosphere. No strange men approached us girls in our group, or the girls in our group, even though none of us were over 19 years old, and we were in our prime, wearing fairly provocative and skimpy outfits. I think they didn't want to set themselves up as a challenge to our escorts. There were usually 4 to 6 guys in our group and as many girls, and have to take them on in a fight. That is all for the time being, and there's more to come next week. I would like to thank John Moslane for putting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I could not do this. I would also like to thank Sean van Vuren for his sterling work in uploading my videos to my YouTube channel, adding the photos, as well as managing my channel so professionally. If you would like to know more about my other works, I have written 5 books in all, and each one is autobiographical. Please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com, where you will find a lot more information as well as plenty of photographs. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my life story, and there is plenty more to come. A thumbnail photo will be attached each week, and thank you so much for all your support and all the very kind remarks you make in complimenting me on my work. I really appreciate it. Goodbye.